evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Rebecca Munro and this is Scotland at 7. And today I am joined by retired media politics professor and the founder of Talking Up Scotland, Professor John Robertson. John, how are you this evening?
I'm well. Speaking to the bedroom where I have the best reception, but not the best seating.
That's fair enough. Well, before we start on all of our main topics, we're going to do a quick coronavirus update and then we'll get on with the main stories of this evening. So, as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,642,458 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,255,867 have been confirmed negative. 386,591 have tested positive. There are 3,189 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 0 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,070. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 356 were in hospital last night, 41 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,082,698 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,572,042 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 131,680 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 40 since yesterday. And this number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. We move on to our first story of this evening, which is Afghanistan. The UK effort to evacuate people by air from Kabul is down to hours now, not weeks, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has said. He admitted there was no prospect of the UK continuing the operation to fly its nationals and Afghans out from Kabul airport after the US decided to withdraw its troops. It came as Downing Street indicated Boris Johnson would use a virtual summit of G7 leaders on Tuesday to lobby the US president to keep American troops at the airport beyond the 31st of August, the date set by Washington for withdrawal. Number 10 also said talks were ongoing with the Taliban and the UK would continue rescuing people as long as the security situation allows. But the prospect of an extension seemed even more remote after the Taliban, who control Kabul and access to its airport, signalled today that they would view this as a provocation. Speaking to reporters at Fort George, Mr Wallace confirmed that Boris Johnson would use the G7 meeting to ask Biden about the prospect of the US extending its deadline for withdrawal into September. Earlier, SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford MP announced that he had written to the Prime Minister demanding daily updates on the evacuation, describing the proposal as a fundamental priority. The call comes as SNP MPs prepare to meet members of the Glasgow Afghan community to discuss the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and to hear from those who still have family in the country. Mr Blackford has said it is vital that the UK plays its part in the resettlement process, with numbers matching those resettled under the Syrian resettlement regime. The SNP Westminster leader has also said the crisis demonstrated the need for the UK Tory government to scrap its anti-refugee nationality and borders bill, as well as reversing cuts to international aid. So, John, do you agree with Ian Blackford that Boris Johnson should give daily updates to reassure and give clarity to the UK government's intentions?
I think there's a great deal that Boris Johnson should do, and a great deal that he should have done some time ago. I think it was apparent really quite a long time ago, perhaps even when Trump was in office, that this was going to happen. There will be an attempt to blame the armed forces for it. I mean, just as Public Health England has been blamed by this UK government, I think we'll see the same again. But I can't believe for a minute that they didn't know this would happen. I mean, there are security services there who knew that the Afghan forces would roll over to the Taliban. I'm not surprised. I've been following a writer at Open Democracy called Paul, I've forgotten his name now, Paul Rogers, Professor Paul Rogers, Bradford University. Now, he knows far more about what's been happening in Iraq and Afghanistan than the participants in the UK government. They're operating at the level of 40 schoolboys and schoolgirls, I would say, compared to him. This was all known, and obviously it is correct, as Ian Blackford has said, that the UK government should do something to try and pick up the pace a bit here, but it's all rather too late.
And under the Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme, 20,000 Syrian refugees in 2015 came to the UK. And Ian Blackford would like this figure to be increased to 35,000 under the new Afghan resettlement scheme. I mean, what do you think the chances are of this happening?
I think with this government, the chances are very poor, actually. I mean, they've talked about allowing 5,000 in and then another 15,000 over the next couple of years. The idea that you can wait 2 years for people to actually get out of that situation it's either naive or it's malicious. I don't know which way you would look at it. But one thing to say about all of this, of course, is that it's a very small number of Afghanis. Most of the people of Afghanistan are having to find a way of dealing with this and staying within the Taliban. And Paul Rogers at Bradford does point out that you would be naive, I think, to think that the Taliban are completely reformed. There is some evidence. There is some evidence that this younger leadership is a bit more pragmatic and will be a little less ideological, a little less fundamentalist. And he's worth reading on that. I'm not suggesting that means that the lives of the people we're trying to get out don't matter, but we have to remember there's a far bigger picture. And it's also the case that very few Afghanis want to come and live in Europe, even, never mind the UK. They want to live within a reasonable distance of their families, to go back and be married and so on. So the vast majority of those who try to leave will leave for Iran or Turkey or other states nearby.
Mm. Boris Johnson is wanting to establish a processing hub in neighbouring Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And Vladimir Putin has interest in these countries and is reported to be not so keen on an open border policy on former Soviet bloc states. Putin could have the potential to thwart the safe passage of refugees, and a hub also depends on the continuing cooperation with the Taliban. So is this further evidence of the UK being in a geopolitical jeopardy?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last word there.
Geopolitical jeopardy.
Jeopardy. I don't know if they even care that much. And the UK government, I think, may be saying what it feels it has to say at the moment. But I think one of the reasons we're in this situation is that I don't think they really care that much about all of this, and that's why this has all been delayed so badly. I don't think the army will be to blame at all. It's been delayed because of a lack of real interest, lack of care, and these seem like last minute sort of elastoplast of these ideas of the hubs. I can't see how they would be feasible. And local Taliban, I don't think, would allow them. And as you've pointed out, I think Putin would fear the spread of jihadis into the neighbouring states next to Russia. Although I think that's much exaggerated. Again, as Paul Rogers points out, the spread of the jihadi virus, if I can call it that, has already taken place. There are jihadis globally. There are jihadi groups who are quite independent. They don't need Al Qaeda in Afghanistan to tell them what to do anymore. And the ISIS group in Afghanistan is tiny. If they cause any trouble at all, the Taliban will suppress them quickly. That whole notion, and spread by people like George Robertson and by others, that somehow this is a disaster for the West because it will lead to like a wasp's nest that's been poked. It'll lead to a spread of jihadis. The jihadis are already here in the rest of the world. That what happens in Afghanistan will be trivial in terms of its impact.
Yeah. You've mentioned you're not too sure if the UK government seem to care that much about helping the refugees, and also with the Nationality and Borders Bill and reversing cuts to international aid. Do you think that we can trust Boris Johnson's top priority right now, or any priority, is to help refugees?
No. I think for anyone to think that was at all plausible, you'd have to wonder about their state of mind. I think this government will do what it has to do to make sure the media doesn't crucify it. But the media is very kind of supine in all of this. So I think they'll just keep on getting away with it. And the opinion polls tell us that a significant part of the population doesn't care either. I mean, it's not a vote loser to be intolerant towards refugees, asylum seekers. It's not a vote loser, sadly. It may be something that you and I would find unacceptable, but a good 40% of the UK population don't care about that and will continue to vote for people like Boris Johnson.
And I mean, why do you think that they don't care? I mean, it might be to put yourself in their shoes. Why do you think that is the case?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I have to be careful how I respond to that. I think a significant part of the population, especially in the more urban parts of England, live live cheek by jowl with immigrant communities, and friction has emerged there. I think for quite a long time, in areas where there is a very large migrant population, inevitably the so-called indigenous population starts to resent that. I think that's a big question. I think what it suggests is that in the past we've had unmanaged immigration. A lot of it to suit, of course, the commercial interests of the powerful, such as the arrival of Bangladeshis in the 1930s, and even in the 19th century to work in the mills. That's where the whole thing, I think, starts to become a problem. But clearly, we have a responsibility to people who are in danger to allow them in. And I think, unfortunately, because of the way things have been handled in the past, there is widespread intolerance in significant parts of the community towards any helping of any groups.
And just lastly,
I've
to
been a
move
bit
on,
Hope
go
I'm
on.
being too negative, please, right?
No problem. And just lastly, to move on to President Biden, do you think that he will extend the US deadline for withdrawal until September?
Well, I don't know, obviously, but
Mm,
he seems quite stubborn on it, doesn't he? I mean,
mm,
they've got that commitment, and there's this kind of quite immature sort of tendency you see in United States policy at times, and it reminds you that they're quite new. They haven't been a world power for very long, and of course it's a very new country in a lot of ways. They like symbols, and this idea somehow of getting all the GIs out on the same day or in the same week that Twin Towers was demolished. That's in their mind. That's an important thing. Now, clearly, to anyone intelligent, it's not an important thing, and we need a more rational approach to that. He may change his mind. He may change his mind, but all that will do is allow a few thousand people out through the airport. It won't radically change anything within Afghanistan. And I think that the tendency I mean, Boris hasn't gone quite this far, but the tendency to blame Biden, I think, is incredibly rich and ironic, given
mm.
that Biden has just arrived in post, and that what has happened in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere is a result of the confused and ideological politics with regard to foreign affairs that Bush and Blair are to blame for. And Blair to come out and blame Biden is the most incredible hypocrisy.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening, and that is the New Green Jobs Workforce Academy. People will be able to access information, advice, and skills needed to thrive in a net zero economy. The New Green Jobs Workforce Academy, delivered by Skills Development Scotland, will help people take a greener approach to their careers, from accessing training and learning new skills to finding a new green job. This 100 days commitment of the new Scottish Government has been launched as the First Minister welcomes news that Scottish Power were creating 152 new green jobs, of which 135 will be based in Scotland. These new roles will be listed on the Academy's website alongside information on the types of jobs emerging in sectors crucial to Scotland's transition to a net zero economy, such as renewable energy, construction and transport. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "As we recover from the pandemic, we are determined to build a fairer economy that delivers the skills, opportunities and jobs for the future that will help secure our transition to net zero and end our contribution to climate change." The First Minister described the launch of the Green News Workforce Academy as an invaluable step to preparing the current and future workforce to seize the opportunities afforded as part of a just transition. She said that the Academy will guide people of all ages through a process of identifying the skills they have and the skills that they will need to find and secure green jobs. So, John, in a very general sense, taking a greener approach to careers has to be a good thing, do you think, especially in relation to the upcoming COP26 and the transition to a net zero climate?
Yeah, it's very sensible and it's commendable. We may need more of it. And then one of the ways of dealing, I think, with the hostility that's being stirred up against the SNP Green Alliance here, or coalition or
Mm.
agreement, I think will be to do things, not to fight back, in the media, but to actually get on with things. And what I mean, I'm a bit older here. I remember a previous example of failure to deal with change, with technological change, and in the late 1970s and early 80s, where another Conservative government, and that of Margaret Thatcher, looked at the situation where Scotland needed to move from heavy industry to new technologies, and they did that by just throwing us in at the deep end, by just letting heavy industry go all at once and using the oil money to pay unemployment benefit. And the consequences of that are many, including, of course, Scotland's terrible drug deaths. But what we need is a managed transition, a managed transition from the carbon-based industries to the green industries, the renewable-based industries. It looks as if the SNP and the Green agreement is an attempt to do that. They've got a big challenge. They have to make it very clear that's what they're trying to do, because you can imagine the opposition coalition and some of the unions, in particular the GMB. You can imagine them trying to pick off on a regular basis that particular SNP Green Alliance by finding fault, by finding that jobs have been lost here and there. They must, as this maybe suggests, they must take an aggressive stance here and push real hard for jobs in transition.
And are you a supporter of the SNP and Green coalition that's just happened?
I've looked at the agreement. Well, I'm an SNP member, I should say. I'm an SNP member. I was almost a Green member. When I retired from, I wasn't in a political party until I retired in 2016. I didn't think it was appropriate as somebody who works with young people to be active. It didn't stop some of my colleagues who were Tories, I must admit, but I wasn't. And I almost joined the Greens because I agree with so much of what they do. And it's not just their environmental policies. I think on social and economic issues, they're a bit to the left of, at least of some parts of the SNP is a bit broad. But I felt that I joined the SNP because I felt there was more I could argue with there. So yes, I think the agreement makes a lot of sense, and if they can deliver it, I think that'll be great.
Yes, because they've reassured that employees in higher emission industries will have a just transition and won't be left behind. And do you think from what you've seen so far that this will stand true, or do you think that there will be difficulties later on down the road?
It's a tremendously difficult task. They've set themselves a very, very difficult challenge to do that. But they have no alternative, and nor do we, to support that. We've learned, if we've learned anything from the 1970s and early 80s, we've learned what not to do. And we've learned that we need to do this in a kind of fair and gradual way, which tries to save as many jobs as possible, but still makes that move from carbon-based to green.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening, and that is the Public Health Minister updates Parliament on cervical screening. The Public Health Minister has updated Parliament on progress regarding a further review of women who may have been wrongly excluded from the cervical screening programme. In response to a government-initiated question, Marie Todd informed MSPs of the findings of the review of women whose records indicated they may have had subtotal hysterectomies before 1997, but who were subsequently excluded from screening. All health boards were asked to audit cases and have now written to around 175 women affected, offering appointments appropriate to their individual circumstances. This includes those who need to be reinstated in the screening programme and those who are being offered a gynaecological appointment either because their age means they are no longer eligible for screening or where it is not clear from their records whether they should still be taking part in screening. Anyone affected should now have received a letter. The care offered to women identified by this review is the same as for those whose operations took place from 1997 onwards, which was outlined by the Minister when she informed Parliament that an urgent review of cases had to be carried out. Joe Cervical Cancer Trust will continue to offer support to any women who are concerned they may be affected via their helpline services. So, John, this was a pretty devastating mistake, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, I think that's a good word for it. It is devastating, and several people, or many people, have suffered as a result of these errors. I think, however, again, to come back to the business of what you do about things, I think the population generally wants a government that will just accept mistakes, not try and cover up, not try and make excuses, that will accept that mistakes were made and then do something about it. And it looks as if Marie Todd is intending, at least, and putting the effort into doing something about it. And we have to hope that happens.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think that this fast tracking of women who were wrongly excluded will be a relief to those that were affected?
Well, I think the fast tracking idea, which I'd forgotten about, you remind me there. My local MSP today was actually tweeting about that to constituents about the fast tracking possibilities. So clearly, she recognises that's an important strand in all of this. And I'm not an expert in this field, obviously. I'm not an expert in any field, of course, but plenty of expert in anything. So that it strikes me. I mean, maybe there are people more informed than I am who might be more critical. I don't know, but it sounds like at least they're trying to do something about it.
Yeah. And I mean, back in 2021, however, a woman died of cervical cancer after being wrongly excluded. So although these fast track appointments will now be a relief, do you think maybe they're slightly a little bit too late in your opinion?
Well, I think just about everything in politics is always a bit late, isn't it?
Mm.
It's very difficult to know what you should do. But I mean, clearly mistakes were made. I don't think there's any question of that. Mistakes were made, yeah. And maybe the pandemic will have made things worse, of course.
Yeah. So do you think the important thing here is that the government owned up to their mistake, basically? That's what we should take from this situation.
I think it's clear. It's clear from the opinion polls on the popularity, and particularly, the popularity of the First Minister, is that they like something they see as kind of like responsibility, maturity. They don't like that kind of playground sniping at each other.
Yeah, it's very true. Well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening, and that is that the Scottish Government supported businesses with a £3.6 billion during the pandemic. The Scottish Government has supported businesses across Scotland with £3.6 billion of funding throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Research from the Scottish Parliament Information Centre shows that the Scottish Government has made over £2.7 billion available in support, such as grants, with £968 million being made available to businesses through business rates relief. The Scottish Government has made a wide range of support available to businesses, with some funding going over and above what the UK Government has provided through Barnett Consequentials. Deputy Convener of the Economy and Fair Work Committee, Colin Beattie, MSP, said that businesses in Scotland have had a torrid time in the past 18 months, with lockdowns out with their control, creating real uncertainty over their future. He said that the Scottish Government had listened to the needs of firms across a number of sectors and provided funding and support wherever and whenever they have needed it. So I had a look at the breakdown of this fund, and quite frankly, the organisation and list of businesses it helped is Herculean in scale. It's from taxi and private hire support to museum recovery and resilience top-ups, marine and outdoor tourism restart, newly self-employed people. I mean, the list it goes on. So, John, given this widespread support, do you think that COVID recovery is going to be quite swift?
Well, again, I'm not an economist, so another thing I'm not an expert on. But I don't know. I have read one or two indicators in business journals suggesting that things are actually picking up quite quickly. Clearly, there'll be parts of the economy which have been badly damaged, and some may never recover. I don't know. I mean, there maybe it is. At least it's important, I think, that we hear expert opinion on this. And I suppose, and you've got me, but at least I'm better than I think Reporting Scotland's approach. They I think they had a strip club manager on one night to explain how the economy should recover, or a pub owner. It looks to me, and again, I'm not an expert. That looks like a lot of money, and I've read here and there evidence that actually all three of the devolved governments have gone a bit beyond what was done, in England to help businesses. There's not been much credit for that given out, I don't think, but I think they have done what they can. But it's a classic example again, which takes us right back to things like the bedroom tax. This is a government operating with one arm tied behind its back. It has limited fiscal powers, but I think they're doing what they can. There are those on the left. I went to university with people who consider themselves hard left. I thought I was as well to some extent back then. And there are people on the left who are very grudging about what the SNP has done. This government. I'm not happy with everything they've done, but there are several economic initiatives they've taken, in taxation and on benefits, which have made life for those less well off in Scotland just that bit better than elsewhere. And I don't think they get the credit for that. And this is another example, I think.
Yeah, because Colin Beattie has said that the Scottish Government has provided funding over and above what's been made available by the UK Government. So 100% business rates relief for hospitality, retail and leisure businesses will continue on until March 2022 in Scotland, whereas businesses in the rest of the UK have had to pay part of their business rates since July. So what do you think this says about the priorities of the Scottish Government?
Well, I suppose it's not surprising in a sense. I mean, the SNP is a left of centre party, probably not that far left of centre on some issues, but certainly is a party committed to a greater deal of equality. And the Conservative government is explicitly not interested in that kind of thing. So it would be surprising if it wasn't the case that and the same is true of Wales, I think, that a left of centre government would do a bit more for everyone and be a bit more empathetic to the kind of suffering that's been going on. The government in London, again, as with the Afghanis, doesn't care, really. It doesn't care about the poor or those who are struggling.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening, and that is that the UK government is accused of failing to secure rights of UK citizens with foreign spouses in the EU. The UK government have been accused of breaching their promise to secure the post-Brexit rights of thousands of UK nationals who settled in the EU and married foreigners. Campaigners at British in Europe have written to the Foreign Office Minister Wendy Morton and the Immigration Minister Kevin Foster, telling of the heartbreak and distress endured by UK citizens facing problems with the Home Office over their rights to return home to the UK. Before Brexit, all EU nationals, including people from the UK, were free to move from one member state to another with family members, regardless of where they were from. But after Brexit, UK citizens, non-British spouses, including Germans, French and Spanish nationals, need to apply for pre-settled status before the 29th of March next year. However, they are only eligible if they get a new EU family permit from the Home Office. BIE said it knows of multiple cases of spouses of UK citizens living in the EU being refused family permits for non-British spouses or partners who are facing significant problems with their applications. It told Morton the examples were precisely the kinds of situations we knew UK citizens and their families would face following the loss of our EU rights, and why we asked for a grace period. During the passage of the immigration bill, your ministerial colleagues Kevin Foster and Baroness Trafford gave reassurances to other MPs and peers that such families' futures were safe. Quite clearly, this is not the case, said the letter. BIE is calling on the government to extend the deadline for applications beyond the 29th of March 2022 because of the delays, to give British people the chance to exercise their rights. So, John, is this just another example of Priti Patel's hostile environment policy to all non-Britons?
Well, the hostile environment goes back, of course, to Theresa May and her time in office. You know, again, it's not surprising. How many things have we lost because of Brexit? You would be hard pushed to make a quick list of those. There've been such damage. It's been a form of self-harm. Such damage to the quality of life in the UK. Life for students in higher education, for businessmen, for fishermen. For people with guide dogs who want to travel to Northern Ireland on a regular basis. It's just barrier after barrier, and this is just one more. It must be tremendously upsetting for these people who have relationships, who've lived at a time of free movement in the EU, who had no reason to expect that would come to an end. And then, because of really what is a form of narrow English nationalism, we've, by the skin of their teeth, we've left the EU, and we're paying a tremendous price. Again, it would be nice to think that the Home Office might jump and do something about that, but you've suggested the hostile environment there. I've had some experience of dealing with the Home Office, and the Home Office is set up to put barriers in your way. It's not set up to help. It's set up to stop things happening. And so I have a rather kind of negative view of the prospects here.
Yeah, well, clearly the EU settlement scheme, which is supposed to secure family permits to EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU, it's too inflexible, it's too slow to administrate. So if many UK citizens are experiencing a post-Brexit nightmare to stay with each other, then should this scheme be urgently reconfigured, or at least fit for purpose?
Well, obviously it should, and there are other schemes as well. Schemes that affect the movement of musicians and actors across Europe, and as I mentioned already, people with assistance animals, including guide dogs. There are several schemes that need to be dealt with, but there's not much sign of movement from the Home Office. They're prepared to say certain things and to write to people and say that they're doing this and that, but it looks, to my mind, as if they're just thinking, if we wait long enough, they'll just get used to it. They'll just accept it.
Mm. And many are also worried about their application to remain will be refused, and they'll have to pay the £8,000 for a spouse visa fee. And many just can't afford this. So is this almost a money-making exercise, or perhaps letting the most affluent live where they choose with no regard to hardworking families who have relationships with foreign nationals?
Well, exactly. What you just said, exactly. I mean, this won't affect the super rich or the middle rich or whatever they are. I mean, those who can afford to pay will find a way. They will move. They will do what they like. It's ironic. Many of them active in the Brexit movement themselves, taking out passports for Ireland or south of France or whatever. No sense of double standards, because they're kind of slightly psychopathic people, I suppose. We don't think anything affects them, and if you have the money, it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, you've also got to think, John, I mean, do you think that this will also put stress on the people in the relationships themselves?
Well, again, another area in which I'm not an expert, a marriage counsellor or a relationship counsellor. I think that would seem extremely likely to me, just from the point of view of
Mm.
common sense, that if you put barriers in the way, then people suffer from that, and it puts pressure on a relationship, and that with sometimes really really upsetting consequences. But again, I don't think they care. I mean, the Home Office and this government.
Mm. So do you think then that they won't extend the deadline for applications beyond the 19th of March in 2022?
Well, who knows? Who knows? I mean, there's an element of it's not so much ideological at times. Sometimes it's
Mm.
just like a kind of laziness. The kind of laziness we saw with Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab in this last few weeks, going on holiday when the Taliban sweep across Afghanistan. It's just in there. They don't think it applies to them.
Mm.
So who knows? Maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe some newly appointed civil servants will get on with the job and do it properly. But don't hold your breath.
We'll just have to wait and see. Well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening. And that is that clashes in Portland as Proud Boys rally descends into violence. A right-wing protest in Portland on Sunday has culminated in a gunfight when anti-fascist demonstrators returned fire at a man who shot at them with a handgun in a downtown street. The firefight took place in the heart of downtown Portland soon after 6 p.m. As anti-fascists followed a man at a distance who they were trying to eject from the area, he took cover behind an electrical substation box, produced a handgun and opened fire. He fired at least 2 shots before an anti-fascist returned fire with their own handgun. At least 7 shots were fired. Portland Police Bureau confirmed that a man had been arrested over the shooting but did not have any information on any injuries. The incident came after a day of protest descended into running clashes involving hundreds of protesters and counter-protesters. Earlier that afternoon in the city's suburban east, Proud Boys discharged rounds from airsoft guns while anti-fascists threw firework munitions, and both sides exchanged clouds of choking mace and countless blows in a chaotic running street battle that lasted the better part of an hour. The two sides briefly disengaged at about 4:15 p.m, and street medics on both sides attended to participants who had been beaten, shot, or overcome by mace. Soon, however, traffic was intermittently brought to a halt as the renewed battle stretched across the street and into the grounds of the high school. There, Proud Boys set up a small pickup trucks, smashing windows, slashing tyres, scattering the vehicle's cargo of bottled water, and severely beating the male occupant. When anti-fascists retreated from the car park, Proud Boys interrupted into chants of "Whose streets are streets?" In downtown streets and during the suburban fracas, Portland police were nowhere to be seen until the exchange of fire near 2nd Street in Taylor brought forth dozens of officers and cruisers who arrested the suspected gunman and blocked surrounding streets. So, John, Portland has had a number of far-right incidents since the beginning of the Trump era, and the gaslighting of easily swayed extreme groups by Trump has caused chaos in American towns. I mean, do you think that the federal government and elected leaders will ever get a handle on these volatile groups?
Well, I mean, such is the power, such is the ordnance of the
Mm.
of the FBI and the National Guard, that I think if they wanted to, they could suppress any of these groups very quickly. They'd take lives in the process, but I don't think there's any doubt that they have the muscle to do that if they wanted to. I think they're maybe letting something work out here. I'm stunned. I'm stunned that Donald Trump hasn't been arrested after
Mm.
inciting an attack, which led to the death of security guards. I mean, I just think he clearly incited that. Groups like the Proud Boys. Again, I hesitate, but it's toxic masculinity, isn't it? It's a
Mm.
bit like the Plymouth shooter. If women don't treat them nicely, if women are not submissive to them, then they go in the huff. Now, unfortunately, they have the brains of 14-year-old boys, but of course are equipped like Nazi super guards or whatever, heavily equipped with powerful weapons, and the idea that you can have street battles between protesters with weapons is a bit of a shock for us. As a student back in the 1970s, I was at a few protests, but not much was thrown. Not much was thrown back and forwards. A bit of pushing back and forwards and running, but it was all pretty tame compared to that. It's quite scary, isn't it? But having said that, I don't doubt the power of the state in the US. That if they decide it's gone too far, they're probably, I think, to some extent, the state tends to side with the Proud Boys. They might not admit it; they'll be a bit scared to admit it, but they fear the left more, and so they would be happy, I think, to see the Proud Boys suppress the left, and then they'll sort out the Proud Boys once it's a simple two-way struggle.
Well, there was criticism of law enforcers initially standing back and rolling with the situation of people storming the Capitol after Trump's defeat. And again, this seems like a similar situation in Portland. So do you think then that there is hesitancy to interfere with right-wing violence?
Yeah, well, I think there are sympathies with the right wing in the American police in certain cities. I mean, their recruitment practices over the last few years have been, from our perspective, incredibly dysfunctional. They have employed people with a desire to hurt other people. You have to say, I mean, I saw a documentary a few years back where Glasgow police demonstrated how they would disarm a man with a knife. And they had people come across from New York and Baltimore and so on. And these people watched open-mouthed as these four Glasgow policemen gradually diffused the situation and eventually disarmed the policeman. No one was hurt. No one. It took a while. No one was hurt. And the American police were sitting there, and you could hear them say, "I would have shot him there. I would have shot him there." They've got a real problem with the nature of their police forces now. They take a bit of turning around to actually get them the kind of police force they need, which actually cares about the civil population.
Yeah, and to have racists marching up and down your street, brandishing firearms, would be a truly terrifying experience. So do you believe that President Biden will manage to make any inroads to stemming the scale of handguns in the US?
I don't suppose he will make much progress at all in that. I think that's a real problem. I don't see how anybody's going to deal with that, to be quite honest. I think Biden is a centrist by nature. He's a compromiser and a pragmatist, and he will try and keep the boat afloat as best he can, and he will allow a lot. He will tolerate a huge amount. I don't know. It may be that one way of dealing with this, of course, is something that social scientists know for a long time, and that's spread affluence a bit more widely. But part of America's problem is its huge inequality. Countries with massive inequality like that have more violence. The UK has more violence than the Scandinavian countries because we're more unequal. And if America was to move back to where it was in 1945, a much more equal society, the most unionized society on the planet, more people in trade unions there, and the average level of wealth spread a bit, the gap between the poor and the rich there, but not anywhere near as big, then that, almost by magic, that tends to reduce conflict. So that's their only way out of this, I think. And it's our only way out as well in the UK.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, we'll move on to our next story of this evening, and that is the rollout of an antibody study. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf has welcomed the rollout of a UK-wide national antibody study across Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. The Post-Positive PCR Antibody Testing Initiative is a UK-wide national antibody programme and is being launched across Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland to support the UK Government, devolved administrations and NHS to better understand vaccine effectiveness and immune response to COVID-19. Mr Yousaf said, COVID-19 has not gone away and we are likely to be living with the virus for some time to come. It is vital that we have the fullest understanding possible of vaccine effectiveness and the immune response of the border population as we slowly and safely get back to normality. The rollout of this antibody testing study will help us to achieve this and could play an important role in the battle to keep the virus under control. The test will be offered to some people who receive a positive PCR test. I would encourage those who are offered the test and feel comfortable doing so to participate by taking 2 simple antibody tests to be completed at home. So, Post-Positive PCR Antibody Testing Initiative is a means of finding out the vaccine's effectiveness and immune response. So do you think that this continued testing will give most people some comfort that investigations are ongoing into the vaccine?
Well, I'm sure it will give people some comfort. I think there are limits to the actual practical value of testing for people's level of antibodies. I'm fairly sure, and again, to repeat myself, not an expert in these matters, I'm fairly sure that the fact that you have the antibodies doesn't mean you're immune. Fairly sure. I've seen stuff from American research quite recently suggests that this may be psychologically useful. It may, like the lateral flow testing, it may, across a large population, be useful in providing information that collectively helps to keep the infection levels down and makes people feel they know what's happening. But I think there's a danger people think it's another silver bullet here, that antibody testing will allow us all to be more safe and to live more full lives. I think things are not yet fully developed. As with much of the response to this pandemic, there's a great deal we still don't know.
Mm. Yeah. And would you personally take the antibody test if asked to?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a. I do what I'm told. It must have been something to do with my childhood, but yes, I've had both my jags and without hesitation. And if any medics are prepared to say to me this would be a useful thing to do for yourself and for your community, then I'm sure I would take the antibody test. I hope I wouldn't be scared by discovering I don't produce enough, because older people don't produce as many antibodies, so I might get a fright.
Sure. So with COVID-19, just generally in the long run, I know you're not an expert on the subject, but do you think that this vaccine will definitely help in the long run, or do you think variants like the Delta variant, for example, could kind of scupper these good intentions of the vaccine?
Yeah, it does look as if there's, but I mentioned the term silver bullet here.
Mm.
There are no silver bullets here. A lot of people, younger people, probably don't know where the silver bullet comes from, but that's how you kill a vampire. If you knew that, that's how you kill a vampire, is the silver bullet. And so the vampire's kind of analogous to the virus here. But it looks as if I think we're doing the right things collectively
Mm.
in this kind of mixed strategy. This strategy based on a bit more social isolating, a bit more cleanliness, vaccines all round, and other kinds of tests, and just realizing we can't. This virus is so tough to beat. We're not going to beat it. It's going to be with us now, I think, forever, or
Mm.
until something else comes along. So that I think we just anything that the medical experts tell us, I think we should, unless we fear it in some way, I think we should be just adopting it and trying. And we're getting somewhere. I mean, I know infection levels have been climbing recently. They might be plateauing again. Last 3 or 4 days, they've kind of stuck just over 3,000 cases. So that's far too many. But they have stuck. They didn't go any higher. And the
Mm.
infection levels in Scotland still remain significantly lower than other parts of the UK. So I'm moderately optimistic.
Yeah. Just have to keep listening to the experts and see what they say. But
Yeah, by the experts.
we'll move on to the next story, and that is Scotland's music is on tour. Musicians, bands, artists, and venues will be able to apply to a £750,000 Scottish Government fund to bring new and additional concerts to venues and festivals in Scotland next year. Scotland on Tour will support the staging of concerts across the whole nation from between January 2022 and January 2023. Funded by Scottish Government and organised by Active Events, its decision-making panel includes representatives from across the music industry, as well as Creative Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Expo North and South of Scotland Enterprise. Participating artists, venues and festivals will be announced later this year. So this £750,000 fund for musicians and bands and artists is probably quite a welcome boost, isn't it, to a beleaguered music industry, especially after COVID-19, as we've just talked about.
Well, my first reaction was, doesn't sound very much. 750,000. I always thought you got into the millions when you had to try to do something. You tried to do something across a whole country and help a whole industry. I was a bit surprised it was still in six figures and didn't make it into seven figures. I used to work beside people in the music industry, and who taught about the music industry, and I didn't get a chance to chat to them beforehand. But I mean, obviously, right across the board, there are so many things the Scottish Government needs to do, and at least there's evidence here that they are trying to tackle as many of these consequences of the pandemic, which have been so damaging. And of course, the music industry has been tremendously damaged by that, certainly the performing part of it. Although I think it's fair to say that some parts of it haven't been damaged. I think a lot of musicians have been able to, those who can play more than one instrument, have been busy recording in their bedrooms or wherever, and sometimes producing quite appealing music. So yeah, it sounds well intentioned. My first reaction, maybe a bit more required, I think.
Mm, yeah. Do you think it will help maybe perhaps small production companies and freelancers, those who don't need
Yeah.
much, but it'll give them a bit of a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm out of touch in terms of, but I always thought the music industry ran in millions rather than thousands, but never mind.
That's fair enough.
Well intentioned. Well intentioned.
Yeah, and many isolated communities in Scotland have relied on touring theatre shows as well, or the touring cinema. So they're always hugely popular with the locals. So does this idea have a slight hallmark of success, do you think?
Well, I'm sure, yes. I mean, I may be entirely wrong about the scale of the investment. Maybe that is enough. Who knows? Let's hope it is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll move on to our last story of this evening, and that is the declaration of Arbroath in a new exhibition. A new exhibition is set to retell the story of the declaration of Arbroath as part of the 700 commemorations of one of the most iconic documents in Scotland's history. Opening tomorrow at the newly refurbished visitor centre in the grounds of Arbroath Abbey, the exhibition features 50 historic artefacts telling the story of the Abbey and its key role in Scottish history. The declaration was sent in 1320 from Arbroath Abbey to Pope John the 22nd by Scotland's barons, asking the pontiff to recognise Robert the Bruce as the lawful king of Scots. Exploring the history of the Abbey from its founding in 1178 to the present day, the new exhibition draws upon an engaging mix of technology and traditional crafts. This includes an animated film on the letter and its reception by the Pope, an interactive console providing biographies of each of Scotland's barons who added their names to the document, and a digital reconstruction of the Abbey as it would have been at the time of the declaration. Included in the exhibition is the new Arbroath tapestry, handmade by local embroiderers to celebrate the Declaration's 700th anniversary and designed by East Lothian artist Andrew Crummy, the man behind the Great Tapestry of Scotland. Other key highlights from the new exhibition include a new facsimile of the surviving declaration of Arbroath, created by the internationally renowned craftsman David Frank. This was commissioned by National Records of Scotland and donated to the people of Arbroath. It also includes a marble tomb effigy of King William I, commissioned by King Robert I, which provides a material link between two of the central characters in the Abbey story, William, who founded the Abbey, and Robert, on whose behalf the Declaration of Arbroath was sent. Medieval items found during excavations at the site and displayed for the first time, including arrowheads from the Wars of Independence and items used daily by the monks who used to live there. So, John, Arbroath 2020+1 is an ambitious new festival programme aimed at shining a light on Arbroath and its unique place in Scottish history. So are you in any way a Scottish history buff yourself?
Not in a professional sense, but I've read a lot of Scottish history. To make up for the fact, of course, that I was taught none at all at school. And I used to work beside lecturers who taught history in a teacher training college, and they themselves had been taught no Scottish history at university. Glasgow University in the 1950s and 60s offered no. So this is an area which requires tremendous investment and needs to be pushed into the school curriculum much more. The idea that American kids wouldn't know about the Declaration of Independence and what it contains would be, I think, horrifying to anyone in the United States. And yet in Scotland, a document and a process which clearly influenced the American Declaration of Independence is largely unknown. I feel sure you ask the average, school pupil in Scotland about the Declaration of Arbroath, and not many of them will have done anything about it. Things are improving a bit in terms of teaching history, I will admit, but so it sounds like a tremendously useful thing to do, and Arbroath could no doubt benefit from the tourism that would be attracted to it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And with not just an exhibition, but it's also got major artistic events and commissions across literature and history and visual arts. So this sounds like quite a must-see festival, not just for history buffs as well, but for everyone that kind of want to learn about Scottish history.
Well, as you said, it's an iconic document in Scottish history. Probably is the iconic document in Scottish history. I mean, it's really quite radical for its time in terms of the kind of responsibilities it placed on a national leader to actually look after his people rather than just looking after himself, which is what English kings and queens were used to doing at the time. So I think the idea that not all of our children know about it, I think suggests that we need to have something like this, and it shouldn't just be advertised as something you go and see. It should be something. Presumably there'll be online versions of it which can be seen in school and elsewhere.
Yeah. It's a good idea, actually, yeah. And with this new exhibition, do you think it's a way of kind of keeping history current in a sense, and keeping us engaged in our culture.
Yes, yes. We're one of the few countries in the world where most people don't know much about our history. I mean, the national history is the first thing. Is in France or Germany, despite Germany's recent negative history, that's a core subject. In Scotland, you have to do it in S1 and S2. That's after doing some topic work in primary schools, which is quite, obviously, is an earlier stage. And after the age of what, is that 14-ish, 15, you don't have to study history at all in Scotland. And many of the concepts, like what the implications of the Declaration of Arbroath, and some of those concepts require, an older learner, I think, you need to be 16, 17, 18, I think, to come to terms with that. And it's not universally taught. I mean, it's shocking that that's the case.
Yeah. We might need to add it in a bit more later on in the school programmes, but that is all we have time for this evening. So thanks very much, John, for coming on this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure just chatting to you and hearing your thoughts on all the different subjects.
My pleasure too. Thank you.
No problem. And thanks to everyone as well watching at home. And if you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland further, then just follow the link at the bottom of your screen just now, as the more who support us, the more programmes we can make for you. So thanks again to John for joining us this evening, and thanks again to you watching. Have a good night.